Hi friends, I hope you did your mains examinations well today. We are going to discuss the answer key for GS paper 3. We are not going to discuss the entire paper. Let's discuss only important questions, mostly of an analytical nature. I think that would be most helpful to you. Let's start with question number 1. Enumerate the indirect taxes which have been subsumed under GST. Also comment on revenue implications of GST. So this is a straightforward question. All you need to do is list the various taxes which have been subsumed under GST. They are services tax, excess duty, central sales tax, VAT, etc. And write about the revenue implications. Revenue implications, first write about the positive aspects of GST. So GST is actually a progressive reform which have been already implemented in Western countries. So we have implemented it only recently. GST tax, it helps the tax revenue for the government. It is only out of the tax revenue that the government is able to spend on various social welfare scheme. Recently, the revenue from indirect taxes, it is around 9 lakh crore to 9.5 lakh crore each year, out of which GST forms the main part. So write about this. No need to stuff the answer with facts and figures. You need not write the exact figure of the revenue. Write about the essence alone. So write this. Apart from this, when compared to 5 or 6 years ago, various items under both goods and services have been brought under GST. So the revenue has been increased. Earlier, only central government was able to tax services, but now both states and services and center are able to tax services now. So mention about all this. You can write about the negative also, because they have asked about the implications. Write about the negatives also, because the center, it receives revenue under GST. At the same time, it has to compensate the states also. So the GST council, it asks the center to compensate the states for the GST revenue. So write about that. So this is actually a burden for the center. The Finance Commission recently, it has asked to rework this formula. You can write about that. Apart from this, the main negative aspect is that GST, being an indirect tax, is actually a retrogressive tax. As a country, we should only try to increase the progressive tax. So the progressive tax is actually the direct taxes, corporate tax and income tax. GST is actually a regressive tax. So indirect taxes are regressive taxes. We should actually try to move our focus from indirect tax to direct taxes. So you can mention about that also. Second question, do you agree with the view that steady GDP growth and low inflation have left the Indian economy in good shape? Give reasons in support of your arguments. Generally, for this kind of questions, don't take a fixed stand. Don't give points supporting the view. At the same time, don't write points just opposing the view. You have to write about the reality. The best thing is to write both the pros and cons. So over the last few years, there has been low inflation. At the same time, the GDP growth has been good, but it is not high. So first write about the positives. Write about the steady growth in the GDP, how it has impacted the economy, how agriculture has grown, how manufacturing sector has grown, how employment has grown. So write about that. And you have to write about negatives also. Agriculture growth, it is hardly 2.5% in India, but our growth rate target earlier was nearly 4%. So despite low inflation, we are not able to reach that. So write about that. Similarly, we are not able to make use of our demographic dividend. So even with a low inflation and good macroeconomic conditions, we are not able to make use of our demographic dividend. Our unemployment rate is also very high in India. It is around 6.5% in India. So write about the negatives also. And at the end, you can give your own views. The international oil prices are low, and India right now is one of the major fast growing economies. So we should make the maximum out of all these positives to ensure that India reaches a very high growth rate in future. Sixth question, what is India's plan to have its own space station, and how will it benefit our space program? This is a science and technology question. So write about our plan to have our own space station. we have already moved in this direction. We have already in the process of starting our own manned space mission, which is called as Gaganyaan. So this Gaganyaan space station will serve as a stepping stone for our own space station in future. Already there is the International Space Station. So India, we are trying to launch our own space station. There will be many benefits for this, because we can service our own satellites from space. We can allow our astronauts to stay in space and do various experiments. We can bring down the cost of our overall space program, because each time we need not send rockets from Earth. We can service our satellites, we can service our rockets from space itself. So we can write about that. We can do lot of experiments, mainly microgravity experiments in space. So we can do that from our space station itself. That will be useful in many areas. It will be useful mainly for medicine, for research in cancer and for other diseases. Experiments can be done in space. So mention about all this stuff. Similarly, we need not depend on other countries. Right now we are depending on other countries for our space program. So our own space station will solve all this. Next, question number 14. Elaborate on policy taken by Government of India to meet the challenges of food processing sector. Once again, economic question. In this, you have to write about the various government sector schemes. Write about the mega food park scheme. Write about Skill India scheme. Write about the Sampada Yojana, which is the main umbrella scheme for the food processing sector. Mention about that. Under all these schemes, the government is trying to basically improve the infrastructure for food processing sector, mainly cold chain units, logistics, warehousing units, etc. Similarly, mention about the dedicated freight corridor. Dedicated freight corridor will help the food processing sector. Similarly, mention about steps taken under the dairy sector. Mention about National Gokul Mission. So explain about all this. Similarly, write about the various subsidies given for the food processing sector, like Stand Up India scheme and other scheme. Write about Mudra Yojana, etc. Similarly, write about the cooperation between center and states under the food processing sector. You can mention about the thrust given to second green revolution also. So you can write about all these things. Question number 15. How is Government of India protecting traditional knowledge of medicine from patenting from pharmaceutical companies? Main point should be around the TKDL library. So at the start itself, mention about the TKDL library, which is a database, which is a repository of Indian medicines under Ayush. So mention about that. How is India using the TKDL library to good use? In the past, we have used this library to fight against patents filed by USA for Haldi, Neem, etc. So write about that. Similarly, write about compulsory licensing system. Write about that. Write about our generic medicine policy. India is one of the major suppliers of generic medicines to the developing world. Mention about that. Write about our data exclusivity policy, about the clinical data trials. Write about that. These are not directly linked to our traditional medicines, though, but these also have a bearing on our Indian medicine. So write about that. You can write about negatives also. There is a criticism that the TKDL library itself should be used for patenting our own Indian medicines, but not much importance has been given to this. So please write about that. Question number 16. How can biotechnology improve the living standard of farmers? Biotechnology, the thing which should hit your mind is the BT crops. So BT crops, even though there is criticism about BT crops, many BT crops, they are helpful for farmers. So you can mention about that. But BT crops alone does not mean biotechnology. Under biotechnology, we can create many hybrid crops also. These hybrid crops, they are helpful to farmers. They are high yielding varieties. They are drought resistant. Many varieties, they are flood resistant. Many varieties, they can be developed to counter climate change and global warming, which will be helpful for our Indian farmers. Write about that. Similarly, write about the seeds bill in India. So in order to make the Seeds Act a success, we need research under biotechnology. Mention about all this stuff, especially mention about the plight of dry farming, the farmers living in the dry farming areas. Here we need to develop various varieties of pulses and oil seeds specifically suited to the agroclimatic regions of India. Mention about all this. We have to do research for all these crops. Question number 17. Cross-border movement of insurgents is only one of the security challenges facing India in the northeastern region. Examine various challenges currently emanating across India-Myanmar border. Also discuss the steps to face the challenges. So you have to read the question properly. Cross-border movement of insurgents is only one of the problems. So they are asking you to write about other problems also. Other problems you can mention about the smuggling of cattle. Similarly, the movement of people, civilians. We have a free movement regime between India and Myanmar. But this free movement regime is being misused by insurgents. The insurgents also have link with other insurgent groups within India like Maoist. So these groups and other northeast insurgent group like NCSN, Bodo, Naga groups, they have nexus. China is supporting these groups. Myanmar is serving as a link between all these groups. Mention about that. In certain instances, they travel through Nepal also. So mention about all this stuff. Similarly, we have the border trade cooperation. We have the More border. Through this, trade happens. So we have to properly balance between our trade. We have to balance between development and we have to check these kind of these security challenges also. So mention about this and write about the various steps. Recently, Myanmar and India, we signed a pact to ensure security in this region. We are conducting drills in the Indian Ocean region. Write about that. So mention about all this stuff. We recently signed a peace pact with certain insurgent groups also. You can mention about all this. Similarly, our infrastructure, the steps taken to develop infrastructure in the border areas between India and Myanmar. Mention about that. The multimodal transport corridor between India and Myanmar, how this will pose a challenge as far as security is concerned. So if you list all this stuff, it will be helpful.